Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek semi-weekly Instagram live broadcast. I am, as always, Jason Haas. My guest this week is the writer Blake Gray, who is, among other things, the U.S. editor for Wine Searcher. I think brings a really cool journalistic sensibility to his writing about wine that is rare in the world of wine writing. He's got a cool background and he's done a lot of great stuff. So I can't wait to talk to him. But while we wait for people to join, and in the absence of Instagram's recent changes, they made it impossible to share pictures and video during a live. Any of you who have an in with the folks at Instagram and want to register my disappointment that they got rid of that feature, please send it along. But instead of showing you pictures that I took around the property, I wanted to just give you a quick update as to what's going on. I'm going to bring you out into the vineyard a little bit. You'll see how green everything is. We got about 5 inches of rain in the last week. No damage, thankfully. It came pretty gently. We were to the north of the epicenter of the atmospheric river. So instead of the really kind of devastating issues that you saw in LA and some of the mountains north of San Diego, what we got was just a nice, good winter rainstorm. It is possible that it will rain on us a little bit more. The last set of showers are supposed to come through today. If I get rained on, I may be running inside in the middle of this broadcast. But overall, the result from the rain is great. The sheep are back out in the vineyard. The cover crop is growing so fast you can practically hear it, and it's great. Otherwise, we have been working on bottling a couple of new wines. We've got the 2023 Patelin Rosé, 2023 Vermentino into bottle a couple of weeks ago. We are working on new boxes, newly redesigned boxes for the Patelin Rosé. I'm super excited about this. We're going to have those are going to go into box not next week, but the week after, and then they'll be released early in March. We're also going to be doing a small wholesale release of this as well. So this year, it won't just be available to people who are directly customers of us, but we'll have some other folks in the retail and wholesale world out there talking about it, which I think is super exciting. Okay, that's the quick update on what's going on here at Tablas Creek. Let me invite Blake to join. And Blake, I just sent through an invitation, and hopefully you see it, and everything works in as straightforward a way as it did last time. Hello.
Hey.
Magic.
Morning, or well, good afternoon, I guess.
Just barely afternoon.
That's right.
Super. So I gave a super quick preview of your work when we started. I'm not sure if you had joined yet, but I mentioned that you are the U.S. editor for Wine Searcher. You also have written for, not every publication that talks about wine, but a pretty large subset. But I'd like to start by asking wine writers, like, which came first, the interest in writing or the interest in wine?
Oh, definitely the interest in writing. I was a journalist. My first job out of college was to cover police and courts, which is a great starting place for a reporter because you learn all the nuts and bolts of reporting, and you also learn to avoid libel, which I've always telling the wine writer symposium they ought to do a libel seminar. But anyway, no, I was always a writer, and like a lot of people, I had kind of a wine epiphany in France, and just drank a lot and became interested in writing about it because it's nice to be able to write about something you're really interested in. So. For a while, I started reading everything I could about wine, as one does when you want to learn more. And there was a day I was reading Wine Spectator, and for a long time, for 2 or 3 years, I've been reading Wine Spectator, and I was just awed. Oh my God, how do they know everything? How do they know this is in 93 and that's in 91? I could never, oh my God, their expertise. And then one day I started deconstructing one of their stories and realized, you know what? I can write better than that. I don't know if I could taste as well as that, but I can write better than that. And that got me started.
So back to that wine epiphany. Was it an individual wine? Was it a specific dinner experience? What was your? Did you have an aha wine moment?
Oh, yes. It was the sexiest wine you could possibly imagine. So I was doing some volunteer work. This is a crazy story that take longer than your Instagram, but I was doing some volunteer work in a small town in France because it was my do volunteer work period. We were building refugee housing, and I did wallpaper. It's the only time in my life I ever really worked my hands. I learned to do wallpaper, and the French government paid for our food, and our, we lived in a house that government provided, and they paid for our food. We had an account at the supermarché, but we got our wine from the industrial supply shop. There was an enormous vat of wine on a shelf right next to the insecticide, right next to Coca-Cola, and we would go every day because there were a bunch of volunteers here doing this work project, and we'd go every day and fill up a 5-liter jug with this wine, just pour from that jug into our jug, and this was Vin de Table. This was not a fancy. This was not a fancy wine of any kind. I couldn't even tell you what region it was. I could tell you where we were. We were in Condat, which is south of Clermont-Ferrand, not known for its wine at all. It's the Cantal cheese region, if that narrows it down. Saint-Nectaire cheese region is even smaller. But, I had been a journalist in Florida before I set out to see the world. So wine to me was this crappy stuff I drank in bars because I've never liked beer. And didn't have cocktails, and I thought wine was just this sour, lousy beverage, because that's what I had been exposed to. And so I got this, probably the cheapest wine that France produces, and was drinking it every day. And I thought, well, this is really good. And because I was interested in it, there was a chemist at the local fromagerie who used to come over and hit on the women, because we had women volunteers, and we had some from Denmark. They were fairly hot, and so they would come over and hit on the women, and there was an English teacher who would come too, but the chemist at the fromagerie realized that I was interested in wine. So he started buying, more expensive wines, like €5, like even €7 wines, to introduce me to the better wines that France was making. And I was just, from that point, this was my backpack around the world journey. And I had not planned for wine to be a part of it, but from that time it was.
Cool. So can you sort of trace your sort of pre-wine journalism career? You started out writing about, you said, about police and crime writing in Florida. What'd you do next?
So I did that, got the journalism chops, but I've always been into jobs that are fun, hence what I do now. So I switched to the sports department, and then I was a sports writer for a while. Loved that. Got promoted. I was a columnist. I was in my 20s. I was a columnist. You can't really go any better. And then one day I went to an NBA playoff game. It was my first NBA playoff game. And, you sit right there courtside. And I'm like, I don't remember exactly, 26, 27 at this point. Walked down the floor. I'm just so happy. Oh, my God, I'm in the front row in an NBA playoff game. And I looked around at the other sports writers around me, and they're all fat, out of shape, angry people complaining about, the food in the press box is really lousy, and they made us park around the corner. I'm like, you guys were in an NBA playoff game. And I realized that's going to be me in 20 years, and I don't want that to be me. So, a few months later, I quit my job, backpacked around the world, ran out of money in Japan, built up, lived pretty poor in Japan for a while, built up, worked doing what a lot of people do, is teach English, which I was lousy at, frankly. And wrote, I ended up getting a job writing advertising for Japanese companies that had to advertise internationally. And Mitsubishi Motors was their big client. Fujifilm was another one. So that was the most lucrative writing I've ever done, the advertising writing. And I enjoyed it. But that eventually, I decided I want to come back to the U.S. This is when, I was very much into wine when I was in Japan. This was also when Japan was discovering wines. It was good to, I was connecting with sommeliers who were in the same voyage of discovery that I was. And so I decided I wanted to move back to the U.S. and I wanted to write about wine. And I wanted to write, and this will date it because this is the 90s, and I wanted to write for the internet because that's what's the future. So I am now literally living my dream.
Amazing. So Okay, so what was your first wine writing job?
Well, so I wrote about sake before I wrote about wine. I started breaking into it because I was intimidated in writing about wine. Um, but there's not a lot of good writing about, with apologies to John Gontner, who's great. There's not a lot of good writing about sake in English, so that was pretty easy pickings. Um, I had a job. I came back. I needed a job. I had a job as a city editor at a paper in the Bay Area. It's not the Chronicle, a smaller one. Um, and I decided I was going to write some features to show that I could write about wine. So I wrote a couple of features. This was about San Mateo County wineries, and I used that as a springboard to get a job at San Francisco Chronicle as a wine writer. And that really is when my career as a wine writer took off.
When was that? What year are we talking?
2004. I started at the Chronicle.
Cool. So this is maybe a bigger question, but I feel like I can tell in the stories that I read you write that you come from a journalism background rather than like a wine like a wine reviewing background. Because I feel like you tend to probe a little deeper in your questions and in the stories than a lot of the wine writing that I read out there.
Thank you.
Is that something that you are like conscious of, or is it just so ingrained in the way that you think about things it's the only way that you could work? What do you think about that as you put together your stories and your articles?
And at some level, by the way, Rihanna, my paper in Florida was the Tampa Tribune, which no longer exists. I have worked for so many publications that no longer exist. Not my fault. I swear it's not my fault. But anyway, yeah, I mean, so I guess what I try to avoid in wine writing is, and it's unavoidable because we're often all writing the same story, but I don't want to write the same story. What my ideal story is to write something that hasn't been written before, and to tell something different. And I can't, can't always do that. I mean, this morning I wrote about the sales figures for spirits in the United States in 2023. And this is a press release, and everybody's going to write about it, and I get paid by the story. So of course I'm going to write about it. Plus it's interesting, frankly. I find the business end, I think the most undercovered end of wine is the business end. Yeah, I mean, I try to, I want to tell a story. I want it to be factually accurate. I always want to add value. There was a guy who was reading, I had a friend in all my friends in Japan were they were all expats. They were all high-end people, right? This guy was an engineer, and he worked for AT&T. Now he's a university professor, and I don't even understand what he does. But I wrote a story about virtual reality thing, and no, I'm sorry, it was a different story. I wrote a movie review. I used to do that too. I wrote a movie review, and he said to me, looking at his engineer, "This doesn't add anything to my understanding of the picture." And I still think about that 30 years later. I think that yeah, like it's you don't really. There are people you do need. People want Wine Advocate. They want Jeb Dunnick to tell them, I like this Syrah, not that Syrah. That's an important service. And I do some of that because obviously I write about wines that I'm jazzed about. But that's not why people are reading me. And people are reading me to have them. I think, to me, the core of journalism is to say what's going on.
Right.
What is happening? What is the situation? You're allowed to use a lot more opinion in wine writing than the newspaper journalism has changed a lot. But you've always been allowed to use a lot more opinion in wine writing. And I use opinion in my news stories, and I'm not afraid to. But at core, I don't want to take some out left field opinion. I think all wine should be under 13% alcohol because that's the way I like wine. I want to write about what really is happening. I want to say this is the situation on the ground, and if I'm not right about it, then I feel bad about it. So that's kind of my core belief.
Cool.
That it's not writing what I think; it's writing what is happening.
Yeah, and that actually ties into the next question that I wanted to ask, which is, my guess is that probably the majority of the wine lovers who use Wine Searcher are probably using its search capabilities. They're finding whatever. I really want to try a 1981 Beaucastel. Like, I wonder if it's for sale anywhere. I mean, the power of that tool is kind of amazing. And by the way, anybody who has not checked out Wine Searcher's wine searching ability. It's incredible what you can find out there. But you have that search capability, and then you have an editorial arm of it, for which you are the U.S. editor. How do you feel like that editorial piece ties into the core mission of Wine Searcher as an entity?
A good question. It's really a question for somebody above my pay grade, because I'm just always happy that they keep having stories, because it's it's a question they could be asking. Why are we paying this guy to write stories when people come here to look for Beau Castel from 2010? It's a fair question. You seriously have to really ask somebody who pays me rather than me. But my guess is that they do it because they want to bring people to Wine Searcher. They want to keep people, like every other website, and I'll put in Wine Searcher, the world's most used website. You really should check it out. Wine website, not website. Sorry, Google. Sorry, Google, don't kill me. But
libel, that libel that you're talking about.
Yeah, I feel uncomfortable because I took the libel seminar. Google could sue me for anything. Google would just eliminate my. Google owns me. They own my email. Google could just push a button and I wouldn't exist anymore. But in any case, I think that their thinking is that it just draws people. They spend more time on Wine Searcher, and if you like wine, which you'd be surprised how many of our readers are into whiskey. So I should say, if you like wine or whiskey, you start spending money when you start spending money. I spend money when I start oh my God, look at that. Oh my God, look at the price for that. I want to drink that. So, I think that's the plan. I hope that's the plan.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about how you choose what to write about? I'm sure some of it is news related stuff that you feel like you need to cover, but how do you go about generating ideas for what you cover?
It's a really good question. So a lot of it is passive, as you say, news. There aren't many people. Shout out to Kirana at Wine Business Monthly, but there aren't very many people covering wine news. And so, if news breaks, then I'm on it, and I think that's an important part of my mission. When I'm looking for features, the dirty secret of the industry is a lot of it is PR driven, and that's true for me too. A PR person will contact me and say, I have this interesting story. Are you interested? And I get, 25, 30 of those a day. So I sort through some of those, and some of those I am interested in. Sometimes I'm just, I reach out, I see something about some winery that I think is interesting, and I'll reach out to them. Or, if it's a topic, then it's just something that catches my interest, and then I'll write about it. But yeah, I think that any wine writer, including myself, would tell you that a lot more of wine writing is PR driven than I think the public realizes.
Are there particular kinds of stories that you particularly enjoy writing or look forward to writing? Is it the more feature things, the more news things, the more long form, short form? Is there what sort of stuff do you get most excited about?
That's a good question. I guess probably personality features. I like trying. Okay, so this is a real niche thing, and everybody likes to do this. A lot of wine writers like to do this, but I love to write the story of some tiny region that nobody's written about before. I really dig that. So if there's a new AVA, I want to go up there and do a feature on it, that sort of thing. But that's not unusual. I also don't think it's unusual that I like to do, personality-driven features, because people are interesting.
So let's talk a little bit about the world of blogging. You were pretty early into that space. I think, didn't you start the Gray Report in 2009? Is that
something like that? Yeah.
And there was a point at which I remember you were posting multiple posts every week, and it was just a huge driver of content and conversation. And then, of course, the whole ebb and flow and ebb and flow and ebb of the wine blogging world. What was your experience like in that wine blogging community, and in that creating such a
such a personal place to share stuff at the same time as you were also obviously doing things that you were getting paid for. I mean, because blogging is, I mean, it's sort of a public service in a lot of ways. I mean, it might be a self-serving service, but it's still largely unpaid creative work.
Yeah, that's the reason I rarely blog now. I'm not going to go do one of these, dramatic, oh, I'm walking away from blogging things. So I'm never going to walk away from blogging. I'm going to have to mention I'm still going to be blogging. It'll give me something to do. But, and hopefully you'll be able to tell the difference. I don't know. But, but yeah, no, I'm a professional writer. And by professional writer, that means I want to get paid. I'm also a professional photographer because I've been paid to take photos. But as a professional photographer, I'm a decent writer. But point being that there was a time when I was blogging, I was getting a little bit of ad revenue. It wasn't a lot of ad revenue, but it was a few $100, and I really loved doing it. So if I had a story that I couldn't sell, I didn't bother to spruce it up and try to put it in a magazine. I just put it on the blog, put out enough content, and I got some advertising. When my advertising revenue went to zero, then now it's really rare for me to blog about wine simply because if I can't convince some publication, including Wine Searcher, which doesn't take every story I want to do, if I can't convince some publication to take the story, then I think I should do some story that I am going to get paid for, because this is how I make my living. A lot of people who are wine bloggers have some other source of income, but this is how I make my living.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the box that we fall into. I mean, I still write regularly, basically a post a week on our blog, but like, it's not like that blog is itself a source of revenue for me or for us. It's a marketing tool for us at Tablas Creek, and a chance to start conversations or be a part of conversations that are going on. And I think that's, I mean, as you point out, I think it's hard for anybody to maintain a significant level of content creation if they're not being paid for it, and they've got another thing that actually does pay the bills.
So there was a writer, I'm not going to name, who when I was at the Chronicle, I both wrote and edited, and I can tell you that present company included, wine writers are whiny little bitches compared to other people who write for newspaper. They really are. They're the worst. And I know, because I edited food writers, and I've edited sports writers, and I've edited news writers, and wine writers are the worst, present company included. But in any case, there was a guy who went into the Chronicle office to complain about me to my boss's boss. And while he was there, we were asking him, he was a playwright. Ooh, I'm a playwright. He'd written a play once. And, it didn't seem to have any other source of income. And I was curious, because I was already thinking, because the freelancers, it's good to be a freelancer in wine, right? I mean, I get to go to Europe for free. I'm going to Italy for free next week. I'm psyched, right? Woo. But, that's great. You work at the Chronicle, Esther Mobley doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to take these. By the way, Esther's great. What I say about wine journals doesn't apply to her. She's one of the best ones working. But in any case, I was curious about how they do this. And I asked him, how do you able to support yourself? He said, well, I married a countess. So, that's how a lot of people support themselves in wine writing. They have, I know a guy who made a fortune as a business consultant, and he writes about wine because he likes it. I mean, that's generally the way that it is. I'm not going to pour mouth, because I'm not broke. I'm solidly middle class, but I mean, I need to make my money from wine writing.
Yeah. One of the sorts of pieces that it seems like you've continued to write on your blog, and something that I honestly look to every election cycle, is you do like an endorsements piece.
Yeah.
And kind of an analysis of the ballot initiatives and all that stuff. And it's obviously it's San Francisco focused, so it's most useful for people who are there, but there's lots of statewide stuff. I find it super helpful. I appreciate that you do it. Is that sort of political writing and commentary something that you like, that's just going on in your head all the time, or is it something that you particularly enjoy writing about? How come you've chosen to keep doing those pieces?
Well, I'm fairly politically obsessed. I don't write about it very much, but I read the Times and the New York Times and the Post every day, and I'm fairly politically obsessed. But I also skipped over some parts of my career. I've got an award for editorial writing back in the day, so it's something I have done. But I feel like the extremism in our politics is probably one of the biggest problems in this country. And I say this a lot of times when I do the endorsement posts, that if we had to say who we're voting for and why, we'd be less extreme and everything would be better. I have been thinking about what I'm going to be writing this month really soon for this month's endorsement post for months, and I'm struggling with it, and I got to do it really soon. So let me try this out ahead of time. I got to give this clear message. There's a clear delineation. I am not talking about national politics. In national politics, Donald Trump is the biggest threat to this country. We have to keep him from returning to office, and we have to get as many of the Republicans who are supporting him out of Congress, because they refuse to hold him responsible for anything. That's national politics. San Francisco, we got to vote all the progressives out of office. I am not talking about national politics, but you've heard about what's going on in San Francisco. It's both overstated and understated. I walk downtown all the time. But of course, I'm fairly tall. I'm not that afraid of violent crime. My wife will give you an entirely different story. But there are more junkies, feces on the street everywhere. I just read a story this morning about how many fires homeless have been setting because they're in these tents and they set fires. But some of them malicious, and our board of supervisors spent 3 days arguing about their Gaza resolution. We're like 20% over budget, and they're spending 3 days about our Gaza resolution. And this is a common joke here, but I want to see Saudi Arabia pass a resolution telling San Francisco to clean up our act. The Gazans should say, "Hey, go fix your own streets." So that's going to be. I have to say this in a way that I'm a Democrat. I used to be. I voted for Bernie twice, so I used to be fairly left of center, but the left has moved left of where I am. But I would say that majority of my friends are a little bit to the left of me, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose half of them with this thing I'm going to write this week. But it has to be said. We have to vote all these crazy board of supervisors people who are arguing about Gaza when we're 20% over budget. I mean, we have to change this.
Well, thank you for the time that you put into putting those together. I know that they are a lot of time and work, and that very much is a public service. So thanks. I don't know how many people tell you that they read it, but I read it and I look forward to it.
Good. Well, I'm glad, because I do think it's important. I mean, I had some surgery 3 years ago, and I couldn't really, it was difficult for me to do anything. And the one thing that I felt like, gotta get this done, even though I have no energy, was the endorsement post, because I felt like I have to do this. Didn't write any wine stories, didn't make any money, but I have to do this, endorsement post. So, it's interesting because I do think I get more readers for that outside of San Francisco. And I should pay more attention to the California stuff, because I know that that's also interesting. I don't think there's that much interest. Okay, so here's my bitch about California. The problems of having complete Democrat rule, and I'm a Democrat, don't get me wrong. I don't want Republicans running California. That said, how many of our people in the cabinet were appointed originally, and they get in through the power of the incumbency? That just drives me nuts, that we don't really have democracy for a lot of our positions here, because people just picked a Democrat, whether they're the better candidate or not. And I'm probably not going to pick a Republican for governor. I won't say never, but I'll pick a Republican for a cabinet member. I want the best, most effective person. But we never ever, and there are people who have run, and we never ever vote those people in. It's just purely the Democratic steering committee chooses who our cabinet's going to be, and and that's a situation I would love to see change.
Awesome. So during the pandemic, one of the things I know we actually had a conversation, because you started a YouTube series called Intoxicating Conversations with Blake Gray, as a way of bringing some connections and conversations to people when they were in lockdown. This was sort of like a first stage of COVID before things started to open back up project, if I remember right.
Right.
What was your experience like doing that?
I thought it was important. I mean, it's interesting. I sometimes feel like I wouldn't exactly say I'm a parasite of the wine industry, but I'm kind of a saprophyte of the wine industry, right? I mean, like I know there are other people in the wine industry who would consider me the first definition, but like it's not my job. It's certainly never my job in any story to help the wine industry, in any individual story. Not my job, not my role. That said, I am tangentially in that whole thing, and I feel like I felt like a lot of people did when the pandemic first hit, nobody knew what was going to happen, and I thought, oh my God, the future of wine is at stake. I need to pitch in. I need to do what I can do. And it's rare for me to feel that, because there are people like you. You don't need my help to sell wine. You're good at what you do. I mean, Napa Valley doesn't need my help to sell Cabernet. But this was a rare moment where I thought it's all hands on deck, and I'm a hand. So that was what was up with that. Like I felt, and then shortly thereafter, after I started doing it, people, wineries started doing it, and everyone was doing it, and also we saw that the wine industry actually did relatively well during the pandemic. Kind of a shock. So I felt like the need for me to pitch in and do it wasn't there. But no, that was it. It was feeling like this is my community and I have to help.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. Thank you for having that instinct. I mean, these conversations, these Instagram Live conversations, were something that I started out of a very similar motivation at the early stages of the COVID lockdowns. And for me, they've been fascinating enough that I've kept them up now, 4 years later, even as we've gotten back to doing things more or less normally. But I think there are, and maybe this ties into what you said earlier about your interest in doing personality pieces. I feel like there's so many interesting people in the world of wine, and giving people a glimpse into that is, for me, a valuable thing to spend a certain amount of my time doing.
Yeah, so my dream, I was a huge baseball fan as a kid, and my dream was always to be a baseball writer. And then I got close to baseball players, and they're pretty much assholes. And it's baseball is better enjoyed from a distance. They're guys who are super wealthy. They never went. Most of them, the great ones didn't go to college. They were treated like special people from the time they're in high school, and they're obviously there are exceptions, and I could name a bunch of them if we were having that conversation. But the difference, winemakers are the best people in an interview. I mean, it's the intersection of craft and science. I don't like to say art because that's a long conversation. Is wine art or craft? I think it's craft, but that's the thing. I mean, you have the best. You have people who are interested, and I also think that winemakers very rarely have a blinkered sense of the world. I have run into a few, but not very many. You have worldly interests. They've studied things. They've been places. They're international, and they're just the most interesting people. I've interviewed a lot of classes of people in my career. Lawyers, cops, ball players, movie actors. They're also not great, but but winemakers are the best.
Awesome. Okay, last question. Are there, what would you say? Let me think of the right way to phrase this. Do you think that people are? What are the biggest misunderstandings that you think people have about the world of wine that you would like, that you try to address in your writing, or that you would like the opportunity to address? Are there things in the wine world that you think people should know but maybe don't, to the extent that they should?
I don't know if this is exactly a question, but it's a rant that I wanted to go on in this Instagram Live. So here it is. This is maybe a little tangential, but I think it's really important. So the biggest problem for the wine industry, obviously, now is getting young people to enjoy wine, and the outreach of the media to young people about wine is almost exclusively about natural wine, which is a tiny portion of the wine market. I think people are getting more realistic about natural wine, like the flaws being considered the benefits. You see less of that now. But what I would like to see to help the wine industry, and I don't know if this is really answering your question or not, but the people who started natural wine, it was an important thing. The wine world needed it. Get out there, and you'll relate to this because you're regenerative organic. I mean, somebody needed to go out and say, we need to stop spraying all these chemicals. We need to stop putting 200, milligrams of sulfite in all of our wines. Somebody needed to say this. Somebody needed to do this. Somebody needed to prove there was a market for it. That was all really important. But it's split. You have two separate wine worlds. You have the conventional wine world and you have the natural wine world. It's interesting, a winery like yourself, that could be in in a lot of ways you could be called natural wine, but you generally don't aren't considered that way. But that's the thing. I mean, the future wine needs to reintegrate this, and I think the outreach needs to come from the conventional side probably, and I'm not I'm not a business facilitator or something like that, but I guess if I want to get back to trying to answer your question, conventional wine's not evil. I mean, you're conventional wine and you're doing regenerative organic agriculture, right? I mean, there's the natural wine world has this idea that everybody who's not, doing no sulfites is actually making barefoot. And there's just a huge universe in between. And all of that's important. The 000 wines are important. We need those. But I think that I'd like to see, and there's a lot of really bad feelings on both sides. I mean, I talk to conventional winemakers all the time who just hate on natural wine. Myself, when I go out to a restaurant, if they have one, I'm often order it, but I only after talking to the somm, because I always tell them, I want to taste wine, not bacteria. But that,
Yeah,
like I said,
of course, is that so many of them taste like fermentation mistakes to people who are in the what you called conventional wine world.
right. But I feel like that's getting better.
Uh-huh. Sure.
So it may be time. It may be time for this reintegration. So that's what I would like. I guess that's the message I would like to get out to the conventional wine people. Natural wine's not evil. It's important, and we need to reach out to these people, help them, because they're going to help wine overall. They're going to bring in more. They're going to bring in more wine drinkers. And to the natural wine side, hey, a few milligrams of sulfites, it's not evil. That's what I would like to. I guess that's a message I'd like to get out.
Awesome. Great. I agree with that 100%. Cool. Well, Blake, thank you for taking a chunk out of your Wednesday afternoon to share your story and to talk. It's always a pleasure. If people would like to see your work or follow you, what's the best way for them to do it?
I can't say I'm a fan of Elon Musk, but I'm kind of drawn back into Twitter. I'm also on Mastodon and Blue Sky. I'm all W Blake Gray at W Blake Gray on all of them. But unfortunately, nothing has really yet replaced Twitter. And I really like Twitter. I like to write. And as you know, because you blog, it's a lot harder to say something interesting in 280 characters than in 1,000 words. It's a lot harder. You have to be concise, and so I've always really liked the limitations of the format. So anyway, that's the place where I'm most found. I have a Facebook page, but Facebook sucks. They won't, like, you could sign up for a page and you won't see it. But if you follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, or Blue Sky, you'll see everything. Actually, I'm just barely on Blue Sky. Twitter or Mastodon, you'll see everything I write. I'm actually barely on Instagram because I'm text oriented. I'm not once in a while. You've probably seen my Instagram before doing this. I tend to take pictures of like stupid road signs, and not really wine stuff. But anyway, that's it.
And then, in terms of websites, Wine Searcher.
Yeah. Wine Searcher is the main one. I also do a fair bit of writing for Wine Business, which honestly, I mean, I ranted on this earlier in this conversation. I think if more wine writers, if they wanted to get more serious about wine writing, one of the best things they could do would be to try to sell a story to a business magazine, because they're going to have strictures that you probably need. They're going to have editing, and they're going to have requirements that you probably need. Like, I can't go to Wine Business Monthly and say everybody should drink more Cool Climate Syrah because I really like Cool Climate Syrah. This is true. I really like Cool Climate Syrah, but if I want to write it for Wine Business Monthly, I got to say what the sales figures are.
Right. Cool. And then your own blog. I know you don't anymore, but of course, I will want to read your political endorsements when they come out in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I turned off comments for those a few years ago because I didn't want people would go in and understandably just boost their candidate. When I have this whole statement, and I am planning to write with provisos, we got to vote all the progressives out of office in San Francisco. Not nationally, but we got to vote all the progressives out of office in San Francisco. I might take feedback for that on the blog. I don't know. I might want to have some give and take on that. We'll see.
Awesome. And the blog's URL is?
Good question. Let's see. I got my computer here. URL. URL. I haven't checked it in a long time. I think I paid somebody to have my own. Yes, I have blog.wblakeray.com. Oh my God, my last post on that was from May of 2023. Google censors a blog post of mine from 2010. Huh.
Awesome.
There will be a post. There will be a political post later this month.
Cool. Well, I will look forward to reading it.
All right.
Excellent.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Blake. My pleasure.
Right.